Sporting Journal Radio, presented by Onyx.
All right, well, recently we did some filming for Prairie Sportsman on one of the major rivers in the state of Minnesota, fishing for one of the biggest fish in the state. It's kind of a unique opportunity, and it's really one that's got a great backstory. The conservation story behind this fish is really remarkable. And we're talking about the sturgeon, and we went out fishing with the guy that's caught the biggest sturgeon in the state of Minnesota. We wanted to up our odds on catching a good one, so why not go out with Darren Troseth from Three Rivers Fishing Adventures. Darren, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for the invite.
I mean, that's got to be, you should just put that right on the front of your website or on your business card. I caught the state record sturgeon if you want to come, on a guided trip with me.
I kind of like to keep the lower expectations, honestly.
Probably a good plan. And fishing can be a little bit tough. In fact, it was a little slow for us, but I'll tell you what, for a slow night, I mean, we basically kind of had action the whole night. There was never really much of a dull moment. And that style of fishing is, I don't know what the best passive, that's not, you're not doing a whole lot, but I feel like there was something going on the entire time we were out there.
Yeah, it's nice definitely having the live scope down and actually seeing those fish come through. But I would say like our night was probably average. We saw some fish come through. We got to set some hooks on some fish, and, we caught that one. So I do have nights where you don't catch anything and other nights where you catch a bunch. It's really hit or miss. And as far as ice fishing goes, it's definitely a waiting game. And I kind of say, I think it's more like, almost like deer hunting. You're out on your deer stand, waiting for that big buck to come by.
Well, and Dan Amundsen is with us, and David Eckhart is with us here as well, too. And Dan got to catch his first sturgeon on that trip. And Darren, how would you rate Dan's hook set on that fish? What would you grade it as?
It was extraordinary.
Yes, I loved it.
There was a nice little aftermath. I bet you couldn't do that again if you tried, actually.
Even if I tried to set that rod holder where it ended up, I don't think I could. Like I'd miss or something. Like, look at that. How does that happen?
Well, and we'll set it up just a little bit. So we're in a hub, and you had 3 spots drilled. We had 3 lines down. I'm in the middle. You're on one side, and then Dan is on the other side filming down the line, filming you and I fishing. And we each had a line down, and I'll have you explain the gear we were using and how we were fishing here in just a second. But in any case, Dan had a fish. So he had he kind of was handing me the camera. There's gear in the way. There's GoPros. We got lights. There's all kinds of equipment. And Dan, you might have been a little excited.
Well, it's a big fish, right? See, and we had already lost a couple, so we didn't want to make the same mistake because, you can't, it's hard to make a good TV show when you don't catch a fish. So you wanted to make sure you got a good hook set in it. And Darren's over there, set it. I'm like, okay. So here we went, and things went a-flying.
So that's the rod. So we had rods in rod holders on the ice, and that rod, as Dan set the hook, I don't know, some part of the rod must have been hooked on that rod holder, I guess.
Yeah, it had to.
And next thing we know, the rod holder's up in the air, hanging on, it was on the GoPro?
Yeah, on the GoPro and kind of by the ring light.
Yeah.
Just like that. That was not set there. We have it on footage of on camera, how it got there.
So watch that famous hook set on an upcoming episode of Prairie Sportsman that's going to air sometime in the next couple of weeks here. You'll be able to watch it on a PBS station near you or on the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel or at prairiesportsman.org. Darren, obviously you've got sturgeon fishing dialed in, but it's really not too complicated, is it?
Honestly, it's not complicated at all. And really, it's the amount of time you spend out there is how you're going to be successful. I can give you the tools to go out there and show you what to do. But for the most part, these fish are just kind of roaming, out in this basin, and you're just waiting them out. I'd like to tell people, it's almost like deer or cattle grazing in a field, and you just wait for those fish to come through. And you saw that firsthand. That's kind of what happened with us.
Yeah, when we set up where we did, I mean, there was the river was fairly busy. It was a nice day. There were a lot of houses out and about. But where we ended up going was kind of, you can't really get away from people, but we kind of got away from people a little bit. And I asked you, why'd you pick this spot? Is there structure here or anything like that? And you're like, nope, just, and that's kind of pretty consistent throughout that river channel there in the St. Croix, right? It's kind of featureless, and the fish just kind of cruise around, don't they?
I mean, that's what my theory is. I don't have proof of that, but I just have some spots where I feel a little more confident. I don't know if they're better than others. There is a little structure out there where I kind of like to set up along the edges, along the first break, but for the most part, it's really just a waiting type of fish.
And they're cruising around and feeding. What are they feeding on out there?
So I think their main source of food is like bugs and invertebrates. They're digging around in the really soft silt out there, and I think there's probably like a lot of redworms and things out there. Bugs and stuff. Obviously, it's not full of night crawlers. But they like to eat those, and there is a large abundance of shad, and we do like to use shad in the fall. They're tough to get in the wintertime just because you have to use a cast net to get them. But the shad bite really does turn on in the fall. I think they're really trying to put some weight on.
And when you catch those shad, you can't take them. You can't take them off the river, right?
You cannot. So it's just, you bring your net out, you fill up your cooler or bucket, use what you use for the night, and then just discard them. So again, I mentioned this to you when we were out that night, that the live scope has really helped me a lot with that, because you have to get bait like every single night you go out. So that's part of the deal.
Well, and I want to talk about how we used that live scope the other night here in a second too. But just going back to the redworm, when I went out to Winnebago for a few years there and tried to spear sturgeon, which I think I did it 4 or 5 years. I never, where I was spearing, I never saw a sturgeon swim through the hole. So all the sturgeon were safe coming around me. But the old timers would go out there before the sturgeon season started and try to find redworms. They'd try to, I don't know how they were doing it, looking down in the bottom there somehow and try to find redworms in the bottom somewhere. And that's where they'd put up their shanties and then try to spear sturgeon during the season. So that must be a favorite forage for them. But that live scope, if we weren't using that, obviously we had bobbers, and that would allow us, give us some sort of indication that there were fish there. But if we didn't have the live scope, Darren, there were a lot of fish we wouldn't have known that were there.
Yeah, I kind of, it doesn't necessarily help you catch fish. It's just more of an early warning detection, I guess. And I've actually talked to a few guys who are, they don't want to use sonar. They think that those sturgeon might be a little sensitive to it, and they'll just stare at their bobber, all night. And you've seen how, soft they bite. Yeah. You talk about paying attention and being a long night, just staring at that bobber would be kind of long and boring, if you ask me.
Oh yeah. And I'll tell you what, there was a couple of times where sturgeon came in either in pairs. I think one or two times we had 3 sturgeon coming in, and my heart was racing, because you're watching these sturgeon and we're maybe giving the bottom just not slamming the bottom, but pounding the bottom a little bit, just trying to stir up things and get the fish excited. And you'd see him, turn, and you'd see him come back, and you're like, okay, that fish is definitely there. And whether they most of the time they didn't actually bite anything, or maybe they'd slap it with their tail, and you'd see the bobber twitch a little bit. Like, my heart was racing watching those fish go back and forth on the live scope.
Yeah, I guess the one downside is it kind of gives away the size of the fish. This surprise element has gone a little bit, versus 2-foot fish or a 6-foot fish. You're going to be able to tell that difference. But I guess any fish that comes through could be a 100-pounder. But the live scope does give you a pretty good idea, what size that fish is going to be.
Well, there were a couple where we were trying to count the squares on there to see if it would be, maybe as big as the one that you caught, which was 78 inches. It had a 29.5-inch girth, and you estimated it to be about 120 pounds. And before this interview, I was reading a little bit about it, and the article I was reading stated that they thought that fish had been caught maybe 2 other times around the time that you caught yours. I don't remember what the timeline was on it, but it was, in any case, and one guy tried to take pictures, but they were too blurry for the DNR to use them.
Yeah, it was, I think in total that fish may have been caught, 5 or 10 times in the last 10 to 15 years, but there's no definite way to prove that. I mean, the fish isn't tagged or anything. You're kind of going by things you see on the fish, just the overall body size and style, and maybe some markings on the fins or something. But yeah, there's a good chance that fish has been caught, a few times, and it's still out there waiting for someone else to catch it.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And obviously a big fish, and we've a lot of people listening to this has probably heard the story about how you needed to drill another hole and your auger battery was dead, and you put a message out to Facebook. And we recounted that story too on an episode of Prairie Sportsman where you and I did some flathead fishing. So if people want to see that video, they can see it there, or they can see it on your YouTube channel as well, right?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Three Rivers Fishing Adventures, and I have a lot of sturgeon and catfish and just some how-to videos, lots of auger stuff and whatnot. But yeah, the whole sturgeon video is on there. Most of it, it's like 8 or 9 minute video, and you pretty much get the feel of everything that happened that night.
Gosh, I mean, when you just going back to that fish for just a second, when you saw it come up and realized that you had to cut another hole, were you starting to think state record at all at that point yet?
No, honestly, that didn't even enter my mind until it was on the ice. And even then, it still really didn't cross my mind. I'm the kind of guy that just likes to measure every fish and kind of document anyways. So, no, when that first fish first came up, I did know it was over 100 pounds, and it wasn't coming through the 2 holes that we had there.
Man, what's the next biggest sturgeon that you've caught?
The next biggest one is probably 68. And the DNR, so the DNR did this catch and release record system. I want to say it's like maybe 7 years ago now. And I actually had the first record in that system too. And that one was 67.5, which I knew was going to get beat right away. But it was nice to get that program rolling, and I wish they do it for more species. And I have heard that they might be doing that. So that's a good thing to hear.
Yeah, they have to do it for all of them. And I think they are. I think it's going to happen in phases over the next couple of years, different species. I want to ask you if you think that there's, obviously that fish is still swimming, the 78-incher, but if you think there's a bigger sturgeon swimming in the river or swimming in the state of Minnesota. And we'll talk a little bit of flathead catfish fishing as well with Darren Troseth. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back on Sporting Journal Radio.
Live Target, the leader in Match the Hatch, is back with new lures that also match the action. Introducing the Live Craw. The Live Craw is irresistible to bass, walleye, and other freshwater species. FTech's winner, the Ultimate Frog, looks and acts just like a swimming frog. With an exposed ultra-point mustad hook and replaceable legs, the Ultimate Frog has 2 styles, 2 sizes, and 8 colors. And iCast and FTech's winner, the Live Shrimp, mimics a fleeing shrimp for saltwater anglers. Coming soon from Live Target. Ice fishing season is here. This winter, plan a trip to Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Not only will you have the chance to catch their legendary perch, but this year, Haybale Heights has been catching big walleye after big walleye. And they're doing it from a mobile, comfortable snow bear. No matter how cold it is outside, you're warm and toasty on the inside. Learn more and book a trip today at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com.
Looking for winter adventure? Might as well pick a place with over 1,000 lakes. Ottertail County, Minnesota is in the middle of everywhere, offers a simpler pace, and has something for everyone. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com.
We're back. This is Sporting Journal Radio. Thank you for tuning in on the network by demand at sportingjournalradio.com. Maybe you downloaded the podcast wherever you get your favorite podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you very much. I'm Brett Amundson, along with Dan Amundson over there. David Eckhart is with us too, and our guest is Darren Troseth from Three Rivers Fishing Adventures. If you want to go on a guided sturgeon trip or maybe a catfish trip during the open water seasons, get a hold of Darren. He's a great guy. Had a good time. Done a little bit of filming for Flatheads, and then also now just recently filmed a Prairie Sportsman episode for Sturgeon Through the Ice. You'll be able to see that coming up I don't remember what the date is on that.
A couple months, I think.
Yeah,
Mid-April, end of April, something like that.
Our new season on Pioneer PBS is going to go through early May or mid-May or something like that. So it's going to air sometime between now and mid-May. You'll be able to watch it on a PBS station or on the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel. And Darren, we were out there. It was relaxing fishing. I know Dan is hooked. Like, Dan wants to go get sturgeon gear now. He's ready to do it. He just wants to go fish big fish, especially this time of year. And it's funny, being walleye anglers or even bass anglers, panfish guys, when you start to go after fish like 100-pound sturgeon, 40, 50, 60-pound flatheads, or like when we go up to Saskatchewan, we can catch 50-inch pike or 60-pound lake trout. You don't really want to fish for anything else after that.
I totally agree.
It's so much fun. And when you have the chance to do that, and particularly when you have the chance to do that in Minnesota, I mean, to catch giant flatheads or big sturgeon, it's you can obviously see why there is some increased participation, some increased popularity in these fish, particularly sturgeon, man. They become so much fun, and there's more and more places you can fish for them around the state. From I know guys over in Otter Tail County are fishing for them and catching nice fish. The fish that we're reintroducing to Big Stone.
Hey, you shut your mouth.
I mean, there's no fish there. I don't go there. But they grow pretty fast those first few years, so they become a decent catchable size pretty quick, and then they slow down, right? I mean, some of those fish, like you figure that 78 incher was maybe 60, 70 years old, or maybe even older.
Yeah, probably somewhere between 70 and 100 years old. And I think I mentioned to you the night we were fishing that I think that fish is probably done growing. It's been caught, like I think a few times for sure. And it's kind of that same general measurement every single time. So it's probably done growing and probably on the, downward part of its life cycle.
Do you think that's kind of where sturgeon top out in Minnesota then, or do you think there's bigger ones out there?
I do think there's bigger ones out there. I don't know about the St. Croix. I do have seen some documentation of, an 80-incher that was caught up by Taylor's Falls, and that one was caught a few times by a couple groups, and unfortunately it was out of season. They were up there, maybe just, sucker fishing or catfishing or whatever. At any rate, they did catch that one out of season, and it measured 80 inches. So I do think there's bigger ones out there. That one was really skinny, and I think that one was probably on a downward trend as well. But I guarantee you up on the, Lake of the Woods and Rainy River, there's easy 80 inchers up there. And those fish are really fat up there too.
Well, we should mention, speaking of the Rainy River, that we've got our tournament coming back. It'll be the second annual SJR 500 on the Rainy River, April 11th and April 12th. We'll be based out of Riverbend Resort. We'll be having a kind of a pre-party and a rules meeting on April 10th, and then we'll fish on April 11th and April 12th, and it's a walleye and sturgeon. So we'll have prizes for top 3 walleye, top 3 sturgeon by length. Over the combined 2 days. Last year, we did it in a snowstorm. It was pretty interesting, and we only had one access open at the beginning. I think they opened up the second access the second day. I think the day 2 we had 2 accesses open, and there were guys out there chipping that access open and breaking ice and cutting ice. So they put a lot of effort in and I think they just wanted to fish, but it also helped us out too. So we were very appreciative of that. We moved it back a week this year, so it'll be just a couple of days before the walleye season closes. Based on winter, hopefully everything is.
Yeah, I remembered. I've been up there those dates, and I also fished in a blizzard.
Yeah,
and drove up in a blizzard. So
you never know.
Maybe
the way this spring's going, it might be a blizzard.
Yeah,
well, we know how to handle it now.
It was fun. I was jealous of the boats that had windshields though and tops. The boat I was in both days, we didn't have windshield or a top on it, so it was a little bit cooler. But I know, Dan, didn't Jamie have a heater going in his boat?
Oh, a lot of boats did. A lot of boats had heaters. We had tops. We had a jet boil going. We were cooking stews and hot dogs or something. I don't know. Yeah, it was a great time. We were toasty warm. We caught a bunch of fish before you guys even got out there. So it was a fun time. No matter the weather, it'll be a good time. Come on up.
Well, and we know what parking is like up there that time of year, and when you're dealing with maybe only one or two accesses, we went. I think it was 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. for tournament hours last year. We did go a little bit earlier this year. It's going to be 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. We got a bunch of prizes. It's going to be a $40 entry fee. We'll pay 50% back for prizes, so 50% payback, and we're going to put 25% of the entry fees. We're going to donate to the Keep It Clean efforts up there at Lake of the Woods and the Rainy River. And Darren, it's pretty amazing story when you think about the Rainy River and honestly sturgeon fisheries all over the country. And when you look back into the 1800s and the late 1800s, there were sturgeon everywhere in the in a good portion of the United States anyway, particularly from north to south here where we're at, the river systems. But they were pretty much wiped out in a lot of places due to pollution of the rivers, but there's also overharvest. There was the caviar that they were taking these fish out for the caviar. One thing I just learned today that I didn't really know much though is because there's so much fat in those fish that they were also catching them to burn them as fuel for steamships and steamboats. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, the other big one is there's something in their fat or body chemistry that they could use for making glass, and that was another big one too. They made glass using them. So yeah, it's been an amazing recovery, and honestly, I mean, I'm a little biased, but I think it's like the perfect sport fish. It gets really big, it fights really hard, it's easy to catch, and you can, release them really well. They're really good catch and release fish. So I just think, they're the ultimate sport fish.
Well, I want to ask how you got into fishing for them. I know you and I have talked about this before. We probably talked about it on Prairie Sportsman, but I want to ask you that again on this show. But real quick, since Dan is fired up about fishing, give him some tips on the gear, like what kind of rod he should get, what kind of gear he needs for sturgeon fishing.
So are you talking about through the ice or through the open water?
Well, how about both?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, okay. So through the ice, what you're going to want is a, heavy, extra heavy, any lake trout rod, or, some of these guys are making sturgeon rods now, and they're starting to get kind of popular. There was a demand for sturgeon specific rods. So, you want something 40 to 44 inches, extra heavy. I think a glass blank works better just because you don't need the sensitivity, and that thing will take a lot more abuse. As far as line, you probably want 30 to 50 pound braid, and just a sinker to get your hook to the bottom, and really a single or treble hook with some bait on it, and that's really all you need. And then just a bobber just to detect any activity or bites. And really it's about the same when you go to open water, other than you just want a longer rod and a big reel that has a high drag capacity. You don't want to undersize when you're fishing for these fish, because they will spool you and break some rods. So always go out there prepared.
I love it. And then you run some beads on there too?
Yeah, when I'm fishing through the ice, I do like to have a sliding sinker, and then just 5 or 6 beads between the hook and the sinker, and that's mainly just to have it so the bait will lie on top of the soft silt that's there, and just to separate the sinker from the hook. If there's any sensitivity of that fish, sucking up that sinker, he might not feel it. And honestly, a lot of it is just theory. Like, I can't prove one works better than the other. Again, just kind of do what you're comfortable with.
And just set it down there, and then you just wait for the bobber to start bouncing more than anything.
Yeah, they rarely will take it under and run with it. Eventually, they will eat your bait and start swimming away. It's not a fast run or anything. You do want to pay attention though, because I have heard a lot of rods going down the hole once they do finally eat it. But for the most part, they're coming through and they're sucking up that bait, and they're kind of spitting it out and filtering everything just to get to that bait they're wanting to eat. And if they feel that hook, they do sometimes spit it out and just move on. So that's why you kind of want to pay attention to your bobber. And it just kind of bobs as they're sucking that bait up and spitting it out. That's that bobber going up and down. And in the open water, it's the same thing, just with the tip bobbing. That's that fish sucking in and spitting it out and kind of filtering it as he does it.
How long have you been fishing sturgeon, Darren?
I want to say I started like in the early 2000s, like maybe 2002 or 2003. I was big into catfishing at that point and kind of involved with a few websites. That was before Facebook or any of this other stuff. And there were a couple guys that put together a trip up to the Rainy River and said, these people are up here catching all these sturgeon. And if you enjoy catfishing, you'd probably enjoy catching these sturgeon as well. And I'd never caught one before. And, I was, just willing to try anything, just something new, and yeah, we went up there and the very first fish I caught, I think might've been a 60-incher, and we caught a bunch of fish, and I was hooked. And at that time there weren't very many boats out there, just the boats that were, along on this trip. They called it the sturgeon excursion. And it's funny because all those resorts you might know out there on Wheeler's Point, they all used to shut down after the walleye season, and then they'd be closed until they opened back up in the middle of May. So they actually had to convince these resorts to open up so we had a place to stay. And now it's basically full, nonstop. So kind of an interesting evolution of that.
It's an amazing opportunity, bonus opportunity almost, that some people are more excited about now than walleyes. All right, for the radio listeners, we're going to let you go, but we're going to keep this conversation going on the podcast, or for our podcast listeners, we're going to continue here with Darren Troseth. But for you radio listeners, thanks for tuning in. Join us on YouTube for the rest of the show. So Darren, what got you into catfish then? Were you fishing for channels, or were you excited about catching a big flathead, or what got you excited about catfish?
So I grew up on Lake Vermilion, and I was kind of right at the very start of the muskie boom, and I was working at a resort up there, and we were catching a lot of big pike, and all of a sudden we started catching a bunch of muskies, and I really got into catching big fish like that. I love catching the big pike, and it was just something a little different than the walleyes that everyone was catching up there. And then life changes took me down to the metro area, and I started fishing in this area as well, but mostly just for bass or walleye or whatever I could. I didn't have a boat, so I was fishing from the shore basically. And one day I was out fishing on this pier near my house, and I had some sucker minnows. I was fishing for pike, and the minnows died on me. And someone said, you should just take those down to the river and see if you can catch a catfish down there. And I'd never done that before. I'd never caught a catfish in my life. So I did actually go home and start doing some research, and there was really nothing out there. You can just go out there and go on Google Maps and find where to go. So I started digging deep into these fishing websites and trying to find guys that were fishing in the area. And I was able to find some information, and like to go to an area where I could go and catch some fish that was near my house. So yeah, I just went out there one day and chunked up and ended up catching like a 45-pound flathead, and I was just kind of hooked after that. I was done. I've kind of lucked into these big fish every time I've started fishing for them, and it's just hooked me every time. So
I don't know we'll see if Dan can find the picture, but I think I remember asking about that before. And weren't you just covered in mud when you caught that fish?
Oh yeah, I was way undersized. I had like a bass rod, and it was really muddy at the time. So yeah, I was up to my knees in mud trying to get this fish, and I didn't know how to hold it. I didn't know how to get it up on shore. Do I put my hand in its mouth? Do I grab it? I didn't have a net. I didn't know anything, and I was full of mud, and I had like one of these disposable cameras in my box that you bring in and have the film developed, and I just lucked out and had someone come down the bike path and asked them to take a picture of me. And so I did get a picture of it, luckily. And I came home and I was just shaking. My wife thought I was like in a car accident or something. I was like, I got a story for you.
That's so awesome. You bring up a good point there too, that we should probably talk about a little bit when it comes to sturgeon and catfish. There's some ways to hold these fish and some ways not to hold these fish, right? There's some safer ways to handle them.
Yeah, especially like the sturgeon. When people go to grab them, the first thing they want to do is grab them by the gills because they make such good handles. And I don't blame people, because there's really not a good way to handle the fish. But you do not want to do that because you're putting all those weight all its weight on the gill plates, and they are pretty sensitive to that. So the best thing to do is just grab them by the tail with one hand and then slide your hand into the belly with your other hand and just kind of hold them like a piece of firewood, basically. And that way you have good control, of the tail as well. And just like the picture you're showing there. And with flatheads, the first thing people want to do is grab them by the mouth. And with smaller ones, it's quite all right, I think, to grab them by the mouth and hold them up, and get the hero pose like that. But I would recommend the same sort of deal, one under the tail, one under the belly, and you have good control of that. And it doesn't feel quite as natural when you're holding it but after you do it for a while, you will see how that is a much better way to hold them. You always just want to keep them horizontal, because these heavy fish, if you're putting all their weight on their gills and their mouth, it's not a good thing.
Right.
Like you show in the picture there, the fish grips work good too.
It's all about sustainability, and you're mostly catch and release, right? Occasionally, maybe someone will keep a small catfish.
Yeah, my guide trips, I kind of tell people if they want to catch a smaller one, I'm quite all right with that. I'm a firm believer in selective harvest. I would hate to see, complete catch and release. I think we do need to keep some fish and enjoy the resource in that way as well. I
100% agree. I'm all about taking care of our fisheries, but I also really like to eat fish, and I want people to continue to eat fish as well.
And it's unpopular, especially around here, but catfish is like channel cats are delicious, I think, and people don't think of that as a good fish to eat in Minnesota, at least.
Yeah, I mean we can catch quite a few of them out here, smaller ones too, and we've eaten quite a few cats lately. David, I think we had a bunch that you cleaned for us, I think. Well, I think it was you and Dan were fishing, wasn't it?
Yeah, you cleaned them up and you said, here you go, take
we were fishing
these.
Together. Okay. I had fully intended on keeping some, but I was staying out longer than Dan was, and he had a cooler, so I'm like, here you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, because they were delicious. So.
Well, you're welcome.
David,
I have not eaten a flathead though, but I've heard they're pretty good.
I've heard people say they're better.
Either. Yeah, I haven't tried.
That's what I've heard too, but I just tell people they taste like crap.
Just like all the big walleyes and big muskies.
That's right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's no reason to keep a flat. I mean, even if it does taste better, it's probably marginally better. And realistically, with the abundance of channel cats, if you're going to keep a fish, you could more easily probably catch and keep one of those, and keep those big flatheads swimming out there, or go after something else. We actually filmed an episode of Prairie Sportsman with Del Wurspan. I don't know if you know Del at all, Darren. He's out here by Montevideo.
Yep.
Lives on the river, and we caught some channel cats that were probably about this big, maybe, that we kept, and he filleted up and cooked for us. And then we caught a bunch of sheephead, and he's like, I'll tell you what, Brett, you're gonna enjoy these sheephead. And I was like, come on, Del. And they were delicious. They were good.
Yeah, I've heard of people actually, mixing them in with other fish like walleyes and crappies and stuff, and people can't tell the difference, especially in the early in the spring when the water's still cold and that meat's a little firmer. It's kind of overlooked as a fish to eat, and I think it's a kind of does scare me a little about them, is they're eating a lot of mussels and clams and stuff, and they are more susceptible to the chemicals and stuff in the river. If you have a polluted, body of water, I think those drum are the first ones to have it show up, in them. So
interesting. I hadn't heard that before. Also, the relationship between mussels and drum, and even walleyes and bass and some of the other fish, how they basically need each other, or the mussels need those fish to reproduce. That whole story, that process fascinates me. Darren, I'll tell you what, we could keep talking about some of the, I don't want to call them rough fish, but the lesser desired fish maybe in Minnesota. But what I think is really neat, and and I wanted to get your opinion on it before we let you go here, is just the increase in popularity in rough fish or other fish, say sheephead or catfish, other species like that. They're getting more and more popular. And even like burbot, you're seeing burbot become listed as a game species now. I mean, what do you think that's going to do to our fisheries moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in general that the rough fish are, just tougher, and they will survive, the pressure, I guess. The one thing is a lot of them, to target them, you have to be in places where you wouldn't normally go, like the river systems where people are a little more skeptical to go out on just because they fear the safety and the water levels and stuff. So I think it's a good thing that the rough fish are seeing, a boom in their popularity. I don't see it really harming them a lot because a lot of people aren't keeping them as well. So I think that one of the coolest things is, and it really brings a lot of joy to me when I'm doing these guide trips, is a lot of times the people I take out, the fish they catch, it's the biggest fish they've ever caught in their life. And so they're always remembering this, that, hey, you remember that? We caught that biggest fish we've ever caught out there. I think that's really cool. That's probably one of the more cool things about it.
David, have you ever been in any of Darren's fishing tournaments on Fish Donkey?
No, I have not.
What the heck?
Fired.
Fired. You've got some stuff going on there, don't you?
I always plan on it, but I'm always working.
Well,
no, David.
Yeah, a fish donkey's great. Like I started using it as soon as it came out. Like I was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for, because I wanted something that was catch and release and you could document it easy, and the resolution's so good. And so I started doing these contests. It's called King of the Cats for flatheads and channel cats, and also King of the Sturgeon. I do that seasonally, so I do a winter one, I do a spring one, and I do a fall one as well, and that's statewide. So it really, not only is it fun to do, but it's also fun to watch, and getting all these fish documented is really a neat thing.
Yeah, man, that Fish Donkey app has been, that's what we're going to use for the Rainy River tournament too. It's so easy to do, and when you can open things up to different bodies of water, and it's all catch and release, and you just have to take pictures and videos, makes things very, very simple. So again, Darren Troseth, I appreciate the time, and if anybody wants to fish in our tournament, you can learn more about the second annual SJR 500 at sportingjournalradio.com, or look for it on the Fish Donkey app. And Darren, if people want to get on a guided trip with you, what should they do?
They can check out my website, Three Rivers Fishing Adventures. That's with the number 3, and also the same name on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram. And you type in Three Rivers Fishing Adventures, you'll find me. Sure enough.
Very good, Darren. Thanks for taking us out, and thanks for being on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Hear more at sportingjournalradio.com or wherever you get podcasts. It's ice fishing season and time to plan your trip to Riverbend Resort on Lake of the Woods. Stay at the Lakeside Resort along the Rainy River in one of their new cabins and enjoy delicious meals and hot or cold beverages in the Miles Lab Bar and Grill. Or stay in one of their comfortable sleeper houses on the ice, complete with a TV, stove, and lots of walleyes right beneath your feet. You also have the option of staying at their motel, the Walleye Inn, located in Baudette. Book your ice fishing trip to famous Lake of the Woods today at riverbendresort.com. That's riverbendresort.com.